on camera.
Good afternoon. It is 2 p.m. on Wednesday, October 30th, 2019, and I'm Kalinda Lee, the Vice President for Historical Interpretation and Community Partnerships at the Atlanta History Center. I am here with Sue Verhoff, Director of the AHC's Oral History Program, conducting an oral history with Richard Westrick. Mr. Westrick has graciously agreed to be interviewed as part of the AHC's partnership with the Inman Park Neighborhood Association.
Yes.
So thank you for being here.
Thanks for doing this.
We're excited about this. So I'm going to just begin at the very beginning. I noticed that you were born in Michigan, but that you've lived in Atlanta for many decades. So tell us a little bit about what brought you hereabouts.
Back in the early 70s, there weren't too many computers around in the South, and I had just gotten a degree in computer science. So we thought about going back to Charleston, but there's only 2 computers in Charleston, and one of them was owned by the Navy. So Atlanta had more computers than anybody in the South, and we wanted to stay in the South. So we came here.
So I'm going to take one step back because you said we wanted to stay in the South. So if you could tell me a little bit about who we was, and also, or who we were, and where you were already.
My wife, Pat, and I. And what else did you say?
And where were you before Atlanta?
Excuse me. I grew up in St. Pete, Florida, and so did my wife. She's from Ohio. And my folks moved the family to St. Pete in 1945 because my dad had severe arthritis, and the doctor told him if he didn't get out of Michigan, he was going to die. So told him he'd go to Arizona or Florida. So we went to Florida. And I grew up in St. Pete, and then after we got married, we moved to Orlando because Pat was a teacher, and she got a job teaching there. And a year later, I got drafted and joined the Navy. Instead of going in the Army, they let me do whatever I wanted to do as long as I joined something. So at that point in time, everybody who was drafted was going straight to Vietnam. So I joined the Navy. And when I was in the Navy, I got interested and involved in computers. And so when I got out of the Navy then, went back to school, went to Florida Atlantic University and got my degree in computer science. And then we moved to Atlanta.
Okay, thank you. So you've been in Atlanta a long time, and you've been in Inman Park for a very long time.
Inman Park since '75.
Was that the first place you moved in Atlanta?
No, the first year we lived in an apartment out on Buford Highway by Claremont.
So
I found Inman Park by accident. I was working at CNS downtown and driving to work, and the connector was the parking lot. It was an accident, and traffic was stopped. So I got out the old paper map and saw that I could go out Edgewood and then Euclid and work my way over to Buford Highway, or to Briarcliff rather. So I went out Edgewood and turned down Euclid, and I saw the houses, and I saw Bob Gregg's old house, and I stopped because we've been looking for an in-town neighborhood. We didn't know anything about Atlanta. So we wanted an older house because we lived in Charleston and then in Norfolk, Virginia when I was in the Navy, and lived in old houses there and liked it. So it just blew me away. I drove around the neighborhood a little bit and then went home and said, okay, honey, let's go. We got to go see this.
So you chose Inman Park based on it being an in-town neighborhood and based on your attraction to the architecture?
Yeah, we looked for houses in Virginia Highlands and Morningside just to kind of get an idea of what things, and we couldn't afford anything there. So we found our first house in Inman Park, and we could afford it. So $25,000.
Tell me more about this house.
Pardon?
Tell me more about this house.
It was on Sinclair Avenue, and it was a triplex. The main house is divided into 2 apartments, and then there was a downstairs apartment out back attached to the back of the house. So we bought it and then joined the 2 halves back together again. And lived there. By then we had another child, 2 more children actually. We had a total of 3. And as they were growing up, getting bigger, we knew we had to have more bedrooms. So we put stairs in and went up into the attic and converted the attic into 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. And that's where the kids moved into. And we stayed there for, that was 75 until 90.
So why did you move?
So why did we move? We wanted a bigger house and possibly an older one. The first house was built in 1925. So we found a house on Elizabeth Street and fell in love with it. And it was built in 1890. It was the first house on the street. And much larger, 2-story and 3,500 square feet. So we lived there until 3 years ago, and we got tired of the stairs. So we downsized. Then we bought a little 2-bedroom house on Ashland Avenue on the west side of the neighborhood. And that's where we're at now. We finished off the attic. It's just that one big room up there, and that's where all the grandkids go when they come. We fill the place up with blow-up mattresses. Because for Christmas and for festival, there's 14 of us in that little house. We each have 100 square feet. It's a 1,400 square foot house.
So you've had 3 addresses in Inman Park.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you've had shifting family needs throughout this time. So why have you stayed in Inman Park all of this time?
Neighbors. It's a very, very close neighborhood. And good friends. And good things to do. There's a festival every year. I've worked on every festival since 1976. Chaired festival one year in 1986, and then in 1997, Pat and I co-chaired festival. I've been on the board of the Neighborhood Association. I was secretary back in late 70s, I think, or early 80s. Been on lots of committees and, just doing stuff. Co-founded the Tree Watch Committee with Nancy Morrison back in either 98 or 99. And we've planted over 2,000 trees in the neighborhood over that time, over the last 20 years. So we have to, because a lot of the trees in the neighborhood were planted when the neighborhood was developed back in the 1880s. And a lot of them are water oaks, which have a lifespan of about 100 years. So we're losing a lot of trees.
So you've been involved in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so is my wife. She's been on many committees. She still is. More than I am.
So if you don't mind, I want to circle back
Sure.
and talk about a few of these things,
Okay.
kind of one at a time, because there's a lot here in terms of your engagement in the neighborhood. I can see why they chose you. Um, so, so let's begin with the tree watch. Just
Okay.
so because that sounds really interesting. You said that you guys planted over 2,000 trees. Is that what you said?
Roughly, yes.
So how did this come to be? What is Tree Watch all about?
It's an outgrowth of the old beautification committee, and we were losing trees and could tell that we were going to be losing more. We wanted to replace the ones we were losing, and we wanted to have more decorative trees. We planted a lot of dogwoods, many, many, many kinds of trees. And it was a good thing to do. And we've had a lot of involvement from the neighborhood, from the people.
When do you think this began, or do you know exactly? When did Tree Watch begin?
It was either 98 or 99. Just don't remember exactly when.
Was it a project of the neighborhood association, or was it independent of that? Or
No, it's a project of the neighborhood association. Yeah, we're a committee of the neighborhood association, one of the committees. Excuse me.
is it still active?
Yes. I'm not leading it anymore. I stepped down from the chair, and a guy named Jim Abbott is leading it now. But I still work with him.
Do you feel like that particular committee has as much interest or as robust an interest as it had in the beginning? What does that look like with new neighbors and all of that?
We are getting new neighbors showing up, which is good. Younger people. So, yeah, I think it's just as active as it was.
Okay, so I want to ask about the festival. Everybody loves the festival.
So do we.
So tell me how you first became involved with the festival. Let's start there.
I threw garbage, picked up garbage. I've done that every year since. Even when I was chairing it, I'd collect the garbage. But it was just, our friends told us about it. We'd never seen it. We didn't see the one in 74 or 75 when we moved in, because we moved in August. The festival's the last weekend in April, so we didn't even know about it. But then people told us about it and told us that they needed volunteers. So we did, or I did. Pat couldn't do much the first few years because she had the kids. So, because our youngest child was born after we moved into Inman Park. She was born in '76.
So if you were talking to a newcomer to the neighborhood who was in a situation like you, they hadn't seen the festival before, had no idea what it was or what to expect, what would you tell them? What would you tell them it was? What would you tell them it's become? How would you describe this?
I would have to say that it's just amazing. Just amazing. The neighborhood fills up with people. Sometimes you can barely walk down the street. I tell them that there's hundreds of vendors, that there's tents lining Edgewood Avenue and Euclid Avenue, that just everywhere there are people. And that I tell them about Butterfly Ball, which is a dance we have Friday night before festival, Friday night of festival weekend. And that's a lot of fun. We get dressed up for it. And then there's the Sunday night cleanup where everybody bands together and goes out and cleans up, picks everything up, and which is also fun. And one of my favorite memories of the festival is on Sunday night after everything was cleaned up and everybody went home, I'd get in the car or the truck, go out and drive around, make sure everything was okay. And there was always a barricade or two that didn't get moved off the street, or traffic cones that didn't get put back. So a friend of mine and I, Bill McMurray, and I did go out and drive around.
So I've experienced Inman Park Festival and I love it, but
Good.
but I always think about how much work it must be to put this on.
It is. It's a lot of work, but it's fun.
I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about this, especially as someone who's served as chair. What motivates you to do all of this work and makes it fun?
There's an obligation to do it because it's been going on, and you just have to keep it going on. And it's really an honor to do it. It's an honor and it's fun. And it's what holds the neighborhood together.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about that. What makes you feel like it's an honor to serve in that way, and how do you feel it holds the neighborhood together?
I feel it's an honor because so many people have done it and done it well, that they want me to do it. I feel honored to do it. It's just such a unique experience, and it's so much fun.
I want to dig a little bit more about the fun part. You mentioned that one of your favorite memories is something I would never think of, which is actually, going around and making sure that things are taken care of and all the trash is picked up, which is wonderful. I'm wondering if you have any other specific festival memories, whether it be from your first festival or any others.
Yeah. Another guy and I, Joseph Drolet, co-founded the Inman Park Attaché drill team. And one of my favorite memories is the first year we marched in the parade, because it's a parade on Saturday. And what we do in the drill team is we put on a suit, tie, carry an attaché case, and I led it. So I'd march along and scream out orders, and and we do walk around in circles and back and forth and change rows, and people just cracked up. There are cheers and applause and people laughing. It was great. That's one of my favorite memories, that first year.
How did you come up with this idea?
I don't know. I really don't know. Don't remember. My memory's not as good as it used to be.
I'm going to circle back to something else that you said too. One thing that you said kind of in passing as we've been talking this afternoon is you mentioned that you had 3 children
Yes.
who you raised in the neighborhood. And I wanted to know a little bit more about that, since that's often a way that people really connect within their community.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to raise children in Inman Park?
It was good. There was not a whole lot of children, but there was enough that they made friends, and go out and walk up and down the street to visit friends. When I got older, rode bicycles around the neighborhood. We were over on the east side of the neighborhood, and so we didn't have as much traffic as the main streets do, or did. But yeah, the kids went to St. Thomas More grade school, and then high school at St. Pius. So they would have friends over after school, and then it was good. Oh, and something I didn't say is that our little downstairs apartment, Pat's mother moved in from California. In fact, she moved in before we moved in. She was in there the month or so before we moved. But so she lived with us until shoot, 1910 or 2010 rather. She moved to our bigger house, and we had a carriage house there. She lived in the downstairs apartment of the carriage house, and she was 108 when she died. Yes. But so it was a good relationship, and the kids loved being with her. So, and Pat and I would get off for a weekend every now and then.
So it sounds like between your family and the relationship with your neighbors, like you really had a nice kind of extended family.
Yes, it feels like an extended family. I can't imagine, frankly, not living in the neighborhood. That's why we stayed. We downsized. We looked around and found a small house in the neighborhood. So
even though we're talking a lot about the history of the neighborhood as part of this, I think about things that people identify as, community building, right? Relationships with neighbors, things like that. You mentioned that your kids went to private schools. And I know that sometimes community schooling is also a way that people meet each other and connect within the neighborhood. I'm wondering whether that was something you considered in Inman Park, and if there were other community institutions that you connected with in the neighborhood.
Not really, just the neighborhood committees. The Inman Park used to be Inman Park Restoration, now it's Inman Park Neighborhood Association, but you connect with people through the committees and working on neighborhood projects.
So speaking of those projects, we've talked about festival. Another thing in preparation for this interview that I was talking with people about and reading about were the downzoning efforts.
That mostly took place before we moved in. We passed around some flyers to downzone the east side of the neighborhood, and did a little bit on that, but that was right after we moved in. So we were learning the neighborhood ourselves. So the downzoning of the main neighborhood, like I said, it happened before we moved in.
For someone who wouldn't know, can you talk a little bit about what you understand the downzoning effort to be and how it was important?
It was important because the neighborhood was zoned commercial, and it needed to go back to being residential. That was the only way to protect the neighborhood, and that was the first step in protecting the neighborhood, and then the historic zoning was the big step. But it just couldn't stay zoned commercial, that's all.
Do you know anything about what the activism looked like to get that changed? How would you go about getting, or how did they go about getting something like that changed?
I don't know. And what I did know, I don't remember.
So, you said that that was a first step in protecting the neighborhood, and that another very important step was the Historic Landmark District
Yes.
work.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about that?
Not a whole lot. You're going to interview my wife too, and she was on the committee. She was involved with it much more than I was. So I don't really remember a whole lot about it.
That is fair enough, but I will ask you this. Tell me why you said that that was so important. Why do you think it's important?
Because it allowed us to protect our homes. You know, all over town, homes being torn down, and McMansions and apartment houses are being built. You drive up North Highland through Virginia Highlands, and you just, one after the other is being torn down. And the historic zoning prohibits that. So it saved the neighborhood.
I think I read somewhere recently, there was an old quote, but I read it recently, where some politicians said that the city bird, like you know how you have state birds, that the city bird of Atlanta was a construction crane.
I believe that.
So I was thinking about Inman Park in the context of that. And on the one hand, you're talking about how important it is to preserve and protect properties. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, Inman Park is certainly an area that has seen its share of development and redevelopment. What are your thoughts about kind of contemporary development in Inman Park?
It's okay. The Meade property development, the Inman Village, that's all okay. It leads to crowds, leads to more traffic, but it's okay. Krog Street Market is between it and the Beltline. It just really brings crowds in. We live about 3 blocks from Krog Street Market, and on the weekends, cars are parked in front of our house. So, because the parking lot at the Krog Street Market is not that big. So.
Do you feel like that's good for the community?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you feel like that's good for the community or not? Or?
I'm not sure. I don't like the crowds. I do like all the restaurants. So I go back and forth on that.
Another property in Inman Park that people often think about when they think about outsiders think about the neighborhood is the trolley barn.
Yes. I served on the board of the trolley barn for 13 years. And I was vice president for operations. And we loved the trolley barn. I did not work on the restoration of it, the original restoration. I was too busy involved with work at that time and working on our house because this was when we were in our first house. So if I wasn't working for a living, I was working on the house, one or the other. So I've always kind of regretted that I wasn't involved in the restoration of the barn, but that's the way it happened. But it's a great place, and it's lots and lots of weddings. And my wife Pat is now chairman of the board of the trolley barn. When I resigned from the board and Pat joined the board a year or so later, I was told that they had upgraded the Westrick position.
So let's go back in the way that we did with the festival. Mm-hmm. If you were telling someone, maybe someone who was thinking about buying a property in Inman Park, what the trolley barn is and why it's so wonderful, what would you tell them?
I'd have to tell them how important it is to the history of the neighborhood, what its function was, and then what we do with it now. You know, we have our meetings there, we have parties there, we have, and then we rent it out for weddings and business meetings and so on and so forth. It's a nonprofit, so we take the money we make, a lot of it, and distribute it in grants to schools and other neighborhoods for functions, you know, for things that they do. So it's just an important piece of the neighborhood. And you know, when the neighborhood was built back in the 1880s, they straightened out and widened Edgewood Avenue and put the trolley line out Edgewood. And that trolley became the first successful electric trolley in the United States. And it was a 7 or 8 minute trip, I think, from downtown. So, and underneath the pavement, in a few places, there are trolley tracks still underneath there. So, but it's an important part of the history and the flavor of the neighborhood.
So tell us a little bit more. I know about Inman Park's history as the first streetcar suburb, which you're referring to.
Yep.
But for someone who didn't know, so we had this trolley that came out. What exactly is the trolley barn, and how did the neighbors find it and restore it?
The barn was where they worked on the trolleys, on the engines and the cars. It was a service facility. And the eastern end of the barn, where the front door is now, we have pictures. There's pictures at the trolley barn of this. It was just a big door, big opening, and the cars pulled in. The tracks ran in. There was no floor because they would, in the dugout basement, they'd work on the cars up over the head. And there was think there were 3 or 4 sets of tracks in the barn next to each other. And so that was the service facility for the trolley line.
So what inspired neighbors to want to restore it into this event venue?
You know, I'm not sure. Like I said, I wasn't involved in it at that time. I was too busy working on my house and making a living. So I think they just wanted to restore it and save it because it was in the process of falling down. And it was such a part of the history of the neighborhood that people just wanted to save it. So the city owned it and leased it to us for $100 a year or something like that.
Did neighbors physically engage the process of restoring it, or so were neighbors, you know, kind of out with hammers and nails, so to speak, restoring it? Was that a hands-on project? Do you know or recall?
Several people worked on it. Yeah, there's pictures of about, I don't know, 10 people who worked on restoring it, and I guess, I'm sure the neighborhood association chipped in money on it, you know, paid for it. But we bought it from the city 2 years ago, finally. So we own it now.
Well, that's very interesting. So that the neighbors were doing all of this work even though the neighborhood didn't actually have ownership of the property.
Right. Yeah, we didn't own it, but we saved it.
So I'm intrigued about this story that you're sharing about how it went from being a project that the neighbors essentially poured labor and money into to becoming a money maker for the neighborhood. And particularly this idea that you all use some of those revenues to help your own neighborhood and others. Can you tell me a little bit more about this idea of using the proceeds to do projects? What kinds of projects?
Well, the trolley barn did some work on Springville Park, replaced the curbing and the sidewalk, and but I don't really remember who we've donated money to. I know some money goes to schools, neighborhood schools, but I don't know which ones and how much. Pat can tell you about that, since she's president.
It's just such a really neat idea. I love the.
Pardon?
It's just such a really neat idea.
Yeah.
I love the idea of neighbors finding a way to actually come together and make so much difference in their community. Which is actually a good pivot, I think, for me in this interview, because you've talked a lot about the role that you have played as a neighbor, that other neighbors have played at a really kind of grassroots level in making a difference, right? And,
Yes.
but I know that you also, as a community, have been very involved with supporting politicians that you've perceived as friends to Inman Park, and finding other sorts of ways to get support for the community.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you've personally been involved in any of that, if you can talk about who you perceive to be or have been a friend of Inman Park and how they've shown up?
Probably the politician who did most for Inman Park was Maynard Jackson. And he instituted the neighborhood planning unit, the MPU system, which has been a very good thing. And we've had several neighbors serve on city council people. So they helped us a lot by keeping us aware of what was going on in the city. In fact, one of our neighbors was a mayor. Can't remember his name. It'll come to me.
I think it was Campbell, maybe?
Bill Campbell, yes. Yes.
So do you feel like having that kind of representation or being engaged in politics is important for a neighborhood?
Yes, I do. I do. It's important. It's important to work with the city. It's important to help guide the city. I just think it's a good thing to do.
Have there been any other kind of approaches to community building or civic engagement that have been a part of your experience at Inman Park that I've missed? I know, for example, that one of the most important events in recent memory, sort of recent memory, for Inman Park has been the road fight.
Ah, yes.
So one, what can you tell us about the road fight?
It was a tremendous battle. And I was not directly involved like other people were. Sally Dorn and Kathy Bradshaw both put in tremendous amounts of time and effort. And it was just tremendously important to the neighborhood. We lost several hundred houses, but us and the Virginia Highlands and Ponce Islands, but we would have lost more because right where near where, a block away from where our second house was, there was going to be an exit ramp off the expressway when it had taken out a whole block of houses. It just would have been bad.
So let's step back a quick step and just discuss what the road fight was about. What were the issues as you understand them? What was being proposed, and how and why were neighbors so concerned?
We didn't want to lose the houses. We didn't want to lose the neighborhood. And we would have. It would have. Not only would it have taken a lot more houses out, but it would have divided the neighborhood. And then you'd have all the noise and the pollution, and it would have ruined the neighborhood.
So this proposal to build this road would have, kind of split the neighborhood physically, created all of these problems that you
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so when was this, and how did neighbors mobilize?
And how did neighbors what?
Mobilize.
Mobilize. It was in the, well, I can't remember exactly when. It was in the early 80s. And people pulled together. We marched. I remember one time we marched to Emory. I followed in my van in case anybody needed a ride. But because Emory was in favor of it. So we demonstrated that we didn't like that. So it just, I don't know, everybody just pulled together on it. There was some divisiveness. There was people who wanted it. But they're not around anymore.
So in your view, what were the reasons, do you know anything about the rationale for people who wanted the road, the full plan for the road?
Not really. Not really. I never wanted to talk to anybody about it. Anybody who's in favor of it.
What do you think the neighbors accomplished in their mobilization?
The neighborhood what?
Accomplished. What do you think that the neighbors accomplished by opposing the road?
We saved the neighborhood. That's it. We saved the neighborhood. Because like I said, it would have been destroyed. And it would have been not been a nice place to live.
Are there any people that spring to mind as particularly instrumental in helping in that effort?
Yeah, like I said, Kathy Bradshaw and Sally Dorn. That's all I can think of right now. But they were hugely influential.
Besides the protest walk to Emory, are there any other events that you remember or memories that you have specific to that?
Not really, no. There were other things I just don't remember. Like I said, my memory's not as good as it used to be.
So one of the things that's coming up for me as I listen to you reflect about life in the community is that it sounds like there's been a way where both challenges like the road and really positive fun things like restoration of the trolley barn have all helped to consolidate a sense of community.
Yes.
I know it's a little bit slippery, it's a little intangible, but I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about the sense of community in Inman Park.
Sense of community?
Mm-hmm.
There's a strong sense of community. We feel like a community. it's all about the neighbors.
You said that in the very beginning of this interview, you said you were talking about your latest home. And you said you have 14 people there for Christmas and festival.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really interesting. So festival is a homecoming for you?
Yes, for our children.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
About the family?
Yes.
Family being here?
Uh-huh. And connection to the neighborhood.
They all, our kids and their spouses really like festival, and their children do. The children love it. So it's just a fun time, a fun family reunion. We all get together. We see each other during the year off and on, but my son and his family live out in Social Circle. Our younger daughter's in Asheville, and our older daughter's in Denver, so they don't get together very much. But they do for festival and Christmas.
So festival seems like an interesting and nice bridge between the past and the present, and maybe even the future.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What do you imagine for the future of Inman Park? What would you like for the community to be like, look like, feel like?
I think it's probably pretty much going to stay the same as it is now. The area surrounding it is going to grow, but in the near future, I think we're going to see a massive development on the south side of the railroad tracks. The Halsey Yard has been closed down by CSX, and they moved their intermodal facilities out west of town. So that's going to be developed somehow. We had a inter-neighborhood committee that has come up with a plan, a suggested plan. I haven't seen it yet. Just got it in the email a couple of days ago. But that's going to have an effect on us. We'll see. But I think the neighborhood will pretty much stay the same. Close friends, new people moving in and becoming friends. And that's what it's all about.
What have I forgotten to ask that feels important to you?
Can't really think of anything. We've talked about community and festival and Trolley Barn.
Well, I thank you very much for sharing your
Thank you.
memories and your...
Thank you all for doing this.
We're excited about it.
The only question I had was about your involvement with the newspaper.
Ah,
Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Neighborhood newspaper?
Yes, sir.
I helped with layout, helped put it together. I didn't do any, I think I wrote one article for it. Yeah. This is back, I think it was in the 70s, late 70s. So it's a good thing. it helps bind the neighborhood together. I wish I had mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned it. But it does, it helps bind the neighborhood together. It's a way for people to learn find out what's going on.
Thank you. I have one more question now, too. She gave me a moment to think. You may have already covered this, but I always like to ask, if there was one thing, just one thing, that you wanted people to come away from this knowing about Inman Park, what would that be?
It would be that Inman Park is a community of friends and neighbors. I think it's the most important thing. Yep.
Now we're done. Thank you so much.
You're
It was
welcome.
wonderful
Thank you.
talking to you.
Good to do it.
Thank you for coming in.